Hi, my name's Meredith Pletcher. My mentor is Dr. Barbara Philippidis, and this is my presentation on Tess the D'Urbervilles. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in. In England, prior to the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, a woman's legal identity was subsumed by her husband, and under the law, she had possession of nothing except that which her husband or father specifically indicated was for her personal use. This erasure of identity that came with marriage was practically the only choice for women of the working class upwards, and places a woman's worth in her marriageability. Much of the language used about marriage in this time has a connotation of trade or economics. The marriage market, the cost of the match, to name a few. Many of these transactional phrases grew out of conversations about a woman's dowry, thus placing a monetary value on the match. This placed a woman's value in her ability to attract and secure a marriage, and in order to do so, she must possess certain assets. These could vary from wealth to status to connections abroad, but always included virginity. Though virginity would suffice, being called virtuous was the most desirable description a woman could hope for. This nebulous qualifier was just as confusing back then as it is now. What does it mean to live virtuously? The Oxford English Dictionary defines virtue as chastity, especially on the part of a woman. This cut and dried definition doesn't entirely encapsulate the ways perception plays into virtue, and in Tess the D'Urbervilles, perception is key. My paper's goal is to analyze how a single act against Tess, out of her control, caused the rest of her life to unfold the way that it did. Before I can go any further, I must first explain how I came to settle on this topic. As an English literature student, I've always been fascinated with Thomas Hardy's prose and the way he's able to sand the rough edges off of scenes that otherwise might seem mundane or boring. However, the main reason I chose Tess specifically is the way that it portrays the protagonist's rape, both the lead-up and the aftermath. As I began ranging about for a topic to write my thesis on, I tried to think of something I enjoyed, something that I would like to work with for the better part of a year. As an avid reader of romance novels, I leaned towards that genre, trying to figure out how I might be able to add my voice to the discussion. The first thing I noticed was that the general opinion on romance novels was that they were all bodice-ripping and shirtless hunks in tight pants. This, of course, is a terrible summation of the genre and something I found immensely interesting, so much so that I began to consider writing my paper over that. However, my education lie in English literature, predominantly what we now consider the classics, Shakespeare, Milton, Austen, Warton, and countless others. This led me to wonder, what was the first romance novel? Exactly how far back did the genre really span? After all, the categorization of romance at one time meant it was full of swashbuckling and daring adventures, like medieval knights on a quest, not the modern love of 50 Shades of Grey or The Notebook. Upon doing some preliminary research, I found that Samuel Richardson's Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, is generally considered to be the first romance novel, written back in 1740. I'll spare you the synopsis, but suffice to say it was about a lusty master of the house pursuing and attempting to rape the title character and servant, Pamela. The novel resolves harmlessly enough, with Master B and Pamela happily married and Virtue succeeding, but this similarity was enough to spark a memory of a book I read in high school, Tess the D'Urbervilles. From there, the choice was easy. Hardy was writing over a century later than Richardson, and was able to add more nuance to the tale of a girl's ruin at the hands of a more powerful and worldly nobleman. Tess's novel is centered around the trouble she suffers due to her rape, all predicated on the idea that a woman who has had intercourse, be it willingly or unwillingly, is fallen. Thus it stands to reason that virtue must have a value attached to it, and, following this analogy, must then have a cost when it is stolen. This became the focus of my paper. Now, before I get into the meat of the paper, let me first provide some context to those of you who might not be familiar with the story. This novel follows Tess Durbeyfield, a 15-year-old girl who lives in the rural hamlet of Marlin. She's the eldest daughter of Joan and Jack Durbeyfield and acts as the binding glue holding the family together. Her father is a shiftless drunkard, her mother immature and living in the past, and her younger siblings subject to the whims of the parents. The entire family lives a hand-to-mouth lifestyle, relying on Jack to find work. The novel begins when Jack is told that he's actually a descendant of a great and noble family, the D'Urbervilles. This gives the slack-twisted fellow delusions of grandeur, which ultimately result in him being too drunk to go to the market, leading to Tess going on his behalf late in the night. When she dozes off, the family's horse is killed, and so their only source of income is lost. Tess is then guilted by her mother into visiting a nearby manor in order to ask for some money. This is when Tess meets Alec d'Urberville, who, only a short while after she began to work at his mother's estate, rapes Tess. This sets off the events of the rest of the novel. Tess goes on to work at a dairy where she meets Angel St. Clair, a parson's son who has decided to open and run his own dairy and therefore is being trained in the profession. They eventually fall in love, and after much persuading from Angel, are married. Tess, however, had vowed never to marry since she had lost her virginity, but forsakes this vow because Angel swears to always love her. After their marriage ceremony, she reveals the truth and was rejected by Angel, sent back to her parents' house while he goes to Brazil to follow his career in farming. Tess, despondent, holds out hope that Angel will return to her and remains steadfast in her love, scrounging by on the money he gave her so that she did not have to use, and therefore sully, his name. Eventually, Alec finds Tess again, and after providing for her family when she could not, cajoles her into marrying him. When Angel eventually sees the error of his ways and returns, Tess is thrown into the pits of despair, which leads her to murder Alec shortly after learning of Angel's return. She and Angel reunite, and after a short period of roaming the countryside to keep out of sight, are caught by the law, leading to Tess's execution. Just by this synopsis alone, it is very easy to see that Tess has led a terribly tough life. Much literary criticism on Hardy focuses on the idea of fate and inevitability in his novels. This is especially true of Tess. However, I argue that Tess's rape was not inevitable, and that the path her life took afterwards was a result of society's treatment of women, both virginal and not. I take this slightly farther by arguing that not only does Victorian society treat women poorly who have been raped or had sex of their own accord out of marriage, but that the perception of ruin is as good as the real thing. Tess's life was not preordained, but made to happen due to the systematic way women were given a value, both monetarily and societally, based on their perceived virtue. I analyze the way the novel tackles these issues through a variety of lenses, though for this presentation I'll predominantly focus on the way the novel explores perception as a means of ascertaining the truth. Tess's perception of herself is fundamentally altered after her rape, and this shift in self leads to many complications throughout the rest of the novel. After the rape, she returns home to Marlott, unable to continue working for Alec d'Urberville. She comes home to her mother and angrily asks why she didn't warn her there is danger in menfolk. This outcome, while unexpected, led Joan to hope it would result in Tess's marriage to a gentleman. Seeking to make as much good out of it as she could, Joan allowed others over the next day to visit Tess and to spread the rumor that Tess had won the favor of Alec. This party was Tess's first interaction with her friends in Marlott after the rape, and though it raised her spirits briefly, her self-loathing grew the next day. She could have hidden herself in a tomb, her depression grew so great. She was a great lover of church music, yet upon seeing people turn their heads towards her, she knew what their whispers were about, grew sick at heart, and felt that she could not come to church anymore. Her rape not only led to her being ostracized by her friends and community, but from her place of spiritual worship as well. Thus set apart from the community, it is no wonder she considers herself once a victim, always a victim. Her pregnancy confirms to the community that Tess is a virtuous maid no longer, though the distinction is made that it wasn't Tess's choice. One woman points out she thought a little more than persuading had to do with the coming of it, and the fact that she remains no longer virginal is of no dispute now. Tess's depression is only furthered by the loss of her infant child to illness. She begins to conflate her intrinsic value with the extrinsic value placed on her by society. The narrator does a lot of work towards explaining Tess's inner thoughts, at one point wondering if she could have despaired so much at her position had she found herself a spouseless mother with no experience of life except that as the parent of a nameless child. The narrator neatly spells out that most of the misery had been generated by her conventional aspect, not by her innate sensations. Tess is described as a mere vessel of emotion, untinctured by experience, nothing more to passerbys than a picturesque country girl. Yet she was able to be happy after the rape, until she realized that before her was a long road without aid and with little sympathy. So Tess's misery comes from the fact that the world values her less as a woman because of her rape, an act that was entirely out of her hands and due to imposed ignorance, unsuspected by her. Tess gains some happiness back when she goes to work at the dairy milking cows, and continues when Angel proposes to marry her. However, she rejects him and tells him time and time again that she is not worthy of him. In response, Angel spells out to Tess exactly what makes her worthy of him, a list of virtues like being true, honest, just, and pure. These virtues, specifically the one regarding her purity, show what gives a woman, specifically his wife, her value. So Tess was able to inhabit the role of virginal woman because no one knew of her past. But the moment the truth is revealed to Angel, she once again is treated as a fallen woman. He articulates the state change succinctly. You were one person, now you are another, asking how forgiveness could meet such a grotesque prestidigitation as that. Here, her evaluation of her own self-worth hits an all-time low. So the book all but spells out that Tess's value in the eyes of society rests on her chastity, just like the Oxford English Dictionary definition stated. Shifting gears, I'd like to look at the novel through another lens I employ in my essay. Social class, power, and the inextricable way they are intertwined play a large role in the novel's progression and are why certain acts occur the way that they do. Allow me to explain. Tess and her family are described as being a part of the shiftless house of Derbyfield, and are also only able to live on their land and in their house as long as their father, who was the last of the 3 lives for whose the duration of the house and premises were held under lease, lived. So Tess is dependent upon her father for a roof over her head as soon as she is born, and can only have it guaranteed to her until his death, since once he dies, she and the rest of her family will be evicted. Upon his passing, the family is set adrift, unable to count on having a roof over their heads. This places Tess quite low on the social ladder, powerless as both a woman and a poor woman at that. Because of her lower position on the social totem, she is at the whims of those higher up than her, specifically Angel and Alec. Both hold roles that give them titles, Mr. Angel St. Clair and Mr. Alec d'Urberville, and have social influence besides. This culminates in Tess feeling as though she is required to obey them, as she does try to use the manners she was taught and show deference to her superiors. This, along with Tess's general ignorance about the world, is what gave Alec the ability to take advantage of Tess as many times as he did, forcing her to let him put one little kiss on those homery lips on their way to the manor, to watching and interfering as she tried to go about her duties. These transgressions culminate, of course, in Tess's rape, while she is alone in the woods, with him at his mercy. Angel, too, is able to take advantage of Tess, though not in so physical a way as Alec, but to just as devastating an effect. As a parson's son, he recognizes that he has no right to her, no right to seek out where she is, because his class status makes it so that she can't turn him away as she might a man of her own rank. Before their marriage, in one last-ditch effort to come clean to Angel and let him know that she was raped, she says that she wants to confess all of her faults and blunders. Still, Angel shuts her down, saying that we shall have plenty of time to talk over our failings. She tries again, seeming to have grown more wise to the ways of the world, and says, "It would be better for me to do so now, so that you could not say," and she is cut off, though it's clear that she anticipates a fallout despite Angel's promises to the contrary. Angel's utter power over her, both in rank and as the man she loves, keep her from making this confession prior to their marriage, preventing all the woes in the latter half of the novel. It is because Angel told her not to that she didn't. And so, yet again, a man's decision, made on Tess's behalf, causes, ultimately, her death. This novel has been a true joy to work with, and though I got off to a rough start, having lost the month of January to a family illness and most of the month of March to COVID-19 related problems, I am so grateful to have had Dr. Philippidis' guidance throughout the semester. Though my focus has changed from what I settled on in my honors preparation course, I also want to offer my sincere thanks to Caroline Morris and Nina Giobaldi for their support in finding where my passion lies. I couldn't have gotten through this course without the support of my friends and family, and I'd like to give a special thank you to Fiona Graham for letting me bounce my ideas off of her in the middle of the night, no matter how strange or esoteric they may have seemed to her. Thank you all very much for coming to my presentation. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your symposium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Meredith. I'm going to turn it over to your advisor and mentor, Dr. Philippides. I'm going to invite you to say a few words if you'd like, and then we will have a few minutes for questions. So as always, if there are questions that you would like Meredith to answer, please just use the chat box, send them to me, and I will get those answered for you.
It's been a real joy for me to work with Meredith since she came to St. Ed's as a freshman in the honors program. I continue to be impressed by her intelligence, determination, and positive spirit. And boy, that sure applies especially to this semester. So Meredith, you have my warm congratulations.
Thank you.
Lots of congratulations and praise coming in for you also, Meredith.
I appreciate it, y'all. That means a lot.
All right, it looks like we got our first question here coming from Professor Mary Helen. What was the most surprising thing you learned from your project, Meredith?
Oh, that's tough. This is going to be a little more abstract than something specific, but I think for me it was just the number of ways that you can analyze one text. So the myriad of ways that scholars can look at a single text and have so many different perspectives and lenses and analyses based on that single text. So like when I began working on mine, I had to determine really what angle I was going to look at it from because there were so many. And so as you can see, I kind of took I guess a more feminist look at it, kind of looking at Tessa's autonomy throughout the novel and how that played a role ultimately in the outcome of it.
Excellent. Any follow-ups to that comment?
So I think Fiona might have just sent one to me privately accidentally, but she's asking how I think public perception of romance novels has changed since the times of Tess to now. And I do briefly mention this in the introduction to this speech, and I'm not sure if I'm going to go into more depth in the actual essay, but yeah, there really is a shift because, you know, like I said back then, romance, before it became about love, courtship, and the marriage plot, was sort of that courtly love, the quests, going on nights, you know, that sort of thing. So now I think we all can agree that the perception of romance is that it's a woman's genre, which in itself is a kind of problematic way to analyze an entire genre. But I think that the recent emergence of very popular romance novels, like a lot of Nicholas Sparks, we've seen 50 Shades of Grey, have a huge cultural impact on the community, good and bad. So I think that the perception of romance novels is that they're slowly becoming more mainstream. These aren't just paperback Harlequin novels that you find in the resale stores, like coveted away by little old ladies with a lot of cats. You know, this is a predominant genre now for all genders, all ages. And I'm really glad to see that because it's so disappointing to see a genre kind of tucked away simply because of the misconceptions someone can have about it.
Excellent. I think we'll have time for one more question. So I will ask my question then. This is one of those books that I was supposed to have read that I've never actually read. So even after having heard your presentation, what's your pitch? Why, and I have all this free time, why should I pick up Tess of the D'Urbervilles?
Because it's an amazing novel. No, let me give you a little bit more. The language, the prose of Hardy, to me, is just so visceral. You can see exactly what he's painting, and it really like teleports you to that area. There's a lot of scenes of Tess when she's out at the dairy, and she's described by the narrator as this like ethereal forest sprite kind of creature. You can really see it. So even if you don't care for the plot whatsoever, even if you don't care about poor Tessa's miserable life, I think if you're just a lover of the written word, if you really can appreciate well-composed text, that you would have a great time working with Tess.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to send you a collective round of applause from our homes to yours. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Catherine and to Barbara for being here. Our next presentation will start at 2:15. So